Kimi Raikkonen is an F1 legend most famous for winning 21 races for McLaren, Ferrari and Lotus, as well as the World Championship of 2007. While most of the careers that I've covered on this channel are quite old, mainly comprising of drivers from the 70s, 80s or 90s, I've been lucky enough to watch most of Kimi's career myself, having effectively grown up watching him rise through the ranks of the sport. During the 2008 season, I was drawn to the ice-cool driver winning races in the beautiful red Ferrari, and so I became a fan of the then reigning champion, spawning a respect that continues to this day. I find it unfortunate that a lot of newer fans only know Kimi for his blunt interview answers and team radio etiquette, because there is so much more to Kimi than that. Behind the wheel, it cannot be argued that he really does know what he's doing. There's not really that much to say about Kimi's junior career because it was just so damn short. After karting, he went into cars in late 1999 where he immediately won the Formula Renault UK Winter Championship for Manor Motorsport. Yes, it's true, Kimi Raikkonen once drove for Manor. He then did a full season of Formula Renault UK, winning the championship immediately, and just like that he was off to Formula 1. Nowadays, going straight from a regional 2-litre single-seater championship to Formula 1 with only 23 car races under your belt would be absurd, and in fact impossible due to the modern super license regulations. But Peter Sauber was so eager to bring new talent through the ranks that Raikkonen was installed at his team for 2001. What you're seeing here is Kimi's first test for Sauber, where he reportedly lapped half a second quicker than established F1 driver Pedro Diniz, a sign of things to come. In 2001, Kimi immediately set about silencing critics as he scored a point on his debut at the Australian Grand Prix, a race that in itself deserves a place on this list. However, so numerous were the strong performances in his career that I've had to really pick and choose which ones to include, so instead of that race I've included the Austrian Grand Prix, just Kimi's 6th race where he absolutely shone. Up at the front were the McLarens and Ferraris as usual, but behind them almost the whole way through was the young Finn. On average, Raikkonen lapped just 0.6 of a second slower than the race winner Coulthard, and when Mika Hakkinen retired with transmission failure, it was Kimi who benefited to come home best of the rest in 4th place. He would actually score points on 2 more occasions that year, with another 4th place in Canada and a 5th in Britain, and he finished the season 10th in the standings, only 3 points behind his much older teammate Heidfeld. This turned out to be career-defining for both of them, as it was Kimi who ended up being promoted to McLaren for 2002, a move that McLaren had been preparing Heidfeld for years. In 2002, Kimi got his first taste of the podium at Melbourne and the Nürburgring, but for his first laps in the lead he would have to wait until the French Grand Prix. In the early stages he battled hard with the likes of Schumacher and Montoya, but when Montoya dropped back and both of the Schumachers got penalties for crossing the pit exit line, Kimi suddenly found himself with the pressure of leading a Grand Prix. Unfortunately for the McLaren driver, he had the misfortune of being chased by Michael Schumacher in a Ferrari F2002, one of the most dominant pairings of all time, and Michael eventually caught him and went through when Kimi slid on a patch of oil. This was the day when Michael Schumacher won his 5th world title, and Kimi was left to wonder what he could do if he too could race for the Scarlet Scuderia. The 2003 Malaysian Grand Prix started with absolute chaos as Schumacher ran into the back of Trulli and picked up a penalty, and Coulthard retired with an electrical issue. This left 3 main contenders for the race win, with those being Alonso, Barrichello and Raikkonen, but it was the latter who was able to stay out of the pits longer and take the advantage. Ultimately, Kimi absolutely ran away from the opposition and took his first victory by 39 seconds. To this day, he is the 8th youngest winner in F1 history. Talking of history, Kimi actually led the World Championship after this race, which he would hold for 6 races despite no further wins. He eventually lost out by just 2 points to Michael Schumacher, once again showing that Ferrari was the place to be. Unfortunately for McLaren, a promising 2003 did not translate into a promising 2004, and the car became a midfielder. However, there was still a glimmer of performance at the Belgian Grand Prix. After a chaotic 40 laps, Kimi found himself leading a safety car restart despite having qualified only 10th, but with the dominant Ferraris of Schumacher and Barrichello on his tail, he still had a lot of work to do. Using all of his speed and ability, Kimi defeated the Ferraris and won, bringing an end to Michael Schumacher's Schumacher's 7-race win streak. This was actually the day when Schumacher would wrap up his 7th World Championship, but to be honest, on this occasion I don't think Kimi would have cared too much. Kimi finished 2004 in 7th place. Of all the sessions to get right in an F1 season, qualifying in Monaco is easily one of the most demanding and important. In 2005, qualifying was split into 2 sessions, one on the Saturday and one on the Sunday, and the grid would be decided by aggregate time. On the Saturday, Kimi set this monstrous lap, beating Alonso's time by nearly half a second and putting himself in the best possible position for Sunday. It should come as no surprise then that he went on to take pole position and win the race, leading every lap and jumping up to 2nd in the championship standings. For the most part, I've tried to keep this list to 1 event per year, but to be honest it would be a travesty if I didn't include possibly Kimi's greatest ever race, the 2005 Japanese Grand Prix. An engine change forced Kimi to start the race from way down in 17th on the grid, but the race was long and chaotic and he climbed through the field like a hot knife through butter. At the end of the first lap his teammate Montoya crashed out, and at the time of the restart he was 12th. Less than 30 laps later he was in the top 4, and in the late stages he was 2nd, catching Giancarlo Fisichella for the lead. He left it until the very last lap of the race, lap 53 out of 53, but then swept around the outside of Fisichella to take the lead and win the Japanese Grand Prix. Kimi finished the season 2nd in the standings with 7 victories to his name. In 2006, McLaren continued their trend of alternating good years with bad years, albeit not quite as bad as their 2004 had been. The MP4-21 never quite reached the top step of the podium, but that's not to say that Kimi didn't have any standout performances. At the very first race of the year in Bahrain, he was forced to start right from the back of the grid due to a suspension failure in qualifying, but somehow still drove well enough to finish in 3rd place after jumping Button's Honda in the last pit window. In the end, he scored 6 podiums that year and finished 5th in the championship behind the Renaults and Ferraris, but better things were to come for Kimi as he signed for Ferrari for the 2007 season. Finally, his chance had come to ride the prancing horse. In his very first race for Ferrari, Kimi delivered a Grand Slam, meaning pole position, fastest lap and race win. It wasn't easy, as the McLarens of Alonso and Hamilton clearly had pace, but Raikkonen just had slightly more. He was the first person to win on their Ferrari debut since Nigel Mansell in 1989, but unlike Mansell, he was able to keep the form up for the rest of the season. Ultimately, the McLarens did catch Kimi's pace, and for the most part they appeared to be the better package. However, Kimi had great consistency, and he managed to snag wins in France, Britain, Belgium and China. As a result, he was still in contention coming into the last race of the season, but he was only the 3rd most likely to win it behind Hamilton and Alonso. However, fortune smiled upon him as Hamilton had a gearbox problem and dropped back through the field. By the late stages, it was clear that Alonso would finish on the podium, so Raikkonen needed to come first in order to win the championship. Luckily for him, he had a perfect wingman in Felipe Massa, who had qualified on pole and who dutifully took 2nd in order to secure the championship for Kimi. At the end it was Raikkonen first with Alonso 3rd and Hamilton only 7th, with all 3 separated by just a single point. Throughout his whole career there was one track that Kimi couldn't help but excel at, and that was Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. He won here in 2004, 2005 and 2007, with there being no race in 2006, and he led most of the 2008 race until a controversial scrap with Lewis Hamilton where he ended up in the wall. In 2009, Ferrari rather dropped off the pace as Brawn and Red Bull nailed the new regulations, but in a repeat of the 2004 season, it was the Belgian Grand Prix where Kimi came to the rescue. After qualifying in 6th place, Kimi used the straight-line speed of the Ferrari to fight his way through to 2nd, behind Giancarlo Fisichella's uncharacteristically fast Force India. The two of them had a tremendous scrap throughout the race, with Kimi jumping Fizzy and coming home to win by less than a second. It was his 4th Belgian Grand Prix win, but his only win of the season. For the 2010 season, Ferrari was so desperate to sign Fernando Alonso that they basically paid Raikkonen not to race in Formula 1, so instead the Finn did what all Finnish drivers seem to do at some point. He went rallying. In all honesty, Kimi's time in the World Rally Championship left a little bit to be desired, but that's very much coming from the point of view of someone who's used to seeing him winning in Formula 1. It still takes a lot to adapt to not just a new car, but a whole new sport and way of driving, and there probably aren't that many circuit-based drivers who could have done much better. Kimi's best result of the 2010 season was at the Rally of Turkey, where he managed a commendable 5th position, driving for the Citroën Junior team with his co-driver Kai Lindstrom. Kimi finished 10th in the standings in both 2010 and 2011. When Kimi returned to the sport for Lotus, he famously nearly bankrupted the team by achieving significantly more success than they had bargained for. The team offered him way too much bonus money for the number of points he scored, and in the end he was forced to leave 2 races early. I could easily put the whole of his time at Lotus on this list, but in my opinion his best race was at the 2013 Australian Grand Prix, when he came through from 7th on the grid to win, beating the significantly more fancied Alonso and Vettel by over 12 seconds. He didn't lead the championship for long, but he still ended up 5th despite missing the last 2 races, and following on from 3rd place in 2012, his time at Lotus will surely be remembered for years to come. Unfortunately, Kimi managed to rejoin Ferrari at one of the worst possible times, in 2014, right as they produced an absolute dumpster of a car. To make matters worse, he was paired up with multiple world champions Fernando Alonso and then Sebastian Vettel, all but relegating him to the position of wingman to Ferrari's gun driver. Kimi's career began to slowly fizzle out over the next few seasons, but he had somewhat of a resurgence in 2018 in his last year with Ferrari. The SF71H was a good car, to be sure, but Kimi's consistency was also really impressive, taking him to 5 podiums in a row midway through the year and a famous victory at the US Grand Prix. However, his best achievement of the year was probably his smooth and speedy qualifying lap in Monza, taking him to not just pole position but also the fastest qualifying lap ever recorded in Formula 1. His average speed was a ridiculous 164 miles per hour, or 264 kilometers per hour. He eventually finished 2nd in the Grand Prix after a great fight with Lewis Hamilton. By the time he retired from Formula 1, Kimi held the record for the most race starts in F1 history. That record has since been beaten by a certain Mr. Fernando Alonso, but Raikkonen's career actually isn't over yet, as he continues to make occasional starts on NASCAR road courses, and he hasn't ruled out racing in other series in the future. Having a career this long takes real commitment, and I think people are wrong to say that he only ever raced as a hobby. Kimi is a true racer, and even when his racing career comes to an end, he deserves to be remembered as such. The day he retired from Formula 1 was a sad day, regardless of how long it had been coming for, and I'm personally very glad that I got to see his career. Thank you all for watching this video, and thank you Kimi for being an F1 legend.